That's just tragic. I could hear my mother-in-law's low growl from the living room as I walked down the hallway. I didn't stop to figure out what had her so riled up because I already knew the answer. It was me. I'd overheard a few conversations between Daisy and her mom since she'd arrived from France. It was not only clear that she disapproved of our marriage, she was convinced Daisy had lowered herself by marrying me. You need a man who controls you, Daisy, not some weak American who gives you everything you want. You'll never understand the high you get from being completely possessed when your man holds all the power and makes you his. When you give him total control, that's the magic of life. I almost laughed at my mother-in-law's lecture about the magic of control in a relationship. It was a complete mockery of me. But Mom, Owen makes me feel so high, and he's wonderful. He's kind, understanding, and Daisy tried to retort. Then he needs to understand you need a man who fully controls you, not one who just strokes your hair when you're down. Her mother was almost apoplectic at the thought of me loving and respecting her daughter. Daisy and I had met when I was stationed in Vietnam. She was working for the French embassy in Saigon, and we'd hit it off pretty quickly. By the end of my tour, we had decided to get married, which made me happier than anything. But I didn't know that her mother, Sophie, had objected vehemently to the marriage from the moment she'd heard. When Sophie came to visit us from France, instead of changing her mind when she saw how happy Daisy was, she became more vocal in her opposition. Owen, Amanda is a woman who lives under total control from men. Her mother has always sought out relationships where she is dominated. When I was young, I worried about her, as she was often taken advantage of and abused by men. She loved them, but they only brought her misery. Daisy had told me about her mother's tragic life. Daisy's father had abandoned them when Sophie was pregnant, but instead of hating him, Sophie worshipped the man as if he were a saint. I really can't understand how a woman can live like that, I often thought to myself. But I wasn't too worried about Sophie spending her time trying to convince Daisy to change her way of thinking. I figured if Daisy hadn't been affected by her mother up until now, things would be fine. But then I got orders to return to Vietnam to help with another mission, and that's when things started to change. I accepted the 6-month deployment, even though it meant that I'd have to extend my service by another month. My plan had originally been to get out of the service after we were married, as I thought I could support Daisy and our family better as a civilian. But this opportunity was too great to pass up, and I decided to do one more tour. My mother-in-law, Sophie, volunteered to stay in America and take care of Daisy while I was gone. Daisy seemed happy to have her mother around, and I thought it was a good decision. Still, I wasn't completely at ease with Sophie staying. Daisy and I exchanged letters, and she always assured me everything was fine, that she loved me and couldn't wait for me to return. "I miss your love," she wrote in every letter, sweet words hiding a painful truth that I couldn't have imagined. When I returned from the war, I was transferred to Oakland to complete my discharge. I was eager to see Daisy and Sophie again and hoped to get them out of the barracks and into a house. At the airport, Daisy threw her arms around me, and our passionate kiss seemed to make up for the months we had been apart. But then I noticed the bruises on Daisy's arms, and the kiss died on my lips. "Don't worry, Owen, everything's fine," Daisy said, her voice strained. "We'll talk about it at home." On the drive home, I couldn't stop thinking. I had my suspicions about Sophie, but I could never have imagined Daisy was being abused. My anger burned in my brain. "All right, now tell me," I demanded, trying to control the rage that was building inside me. "Tell me what happened." "Owen, I love you. It's okay. Let's just sit down." Daisy pulled me over to the couch and sat, then waited for me to join her. "Owen, I love you. I like the way you make love. But," she paused, her guilt-stricken expression making my heart freeze. But Amanda was right. "There's something about being taken." I jumped to my feet. "Is it that damn bastard your mother had put his hands on you?" I yelled, my anger overflowing. No, Mamie would never let that happen," Daisy smiled nervously. "But he has friends." The plural pierced my heart. I grabbed my duffel bag and my handheld case and stumbled out to the car. Daisy followed me, swearing that she still loved me, and Amanda had assured her that this wouldn't affect our marriage. I restrained myself by squeezing the keys in my hand until they cut into my flesh. I wanted to kill my wife, her lovers, and her damn mother. I lunged with my fist, but stopped as my wife flinched. I got into the car and sped away. I didn't know what to do. My wife admitted to cheating on me, but I didn't have any proof. Could I get a divorce on the grounds of adultery? I didn't think so. On the other hand, we didn't have any assets other than the house from my parents that I had before I married, so there wasn't any pressing need for any legal action. Daisy and Sophie could go to hell. Let them sort it out. I settled into the living room and quickly became a part of the Felice family. I was willing to watch her two daughters, kids who were 6 and 4, who loved to climb all over their Uncle Owen. I used my GI Bill to get back into college. I had 2 years before I'd enlisted, and the California State University system was cheap enough that my GI Bill payments were enough to live on, with rent from the Felicis added in, although I reduced the rent because they let me live there. I'd always wanted to study engineering, and finally I had the chance. I didn't date, although Mark and Felice continued to encourage me, even bringing in nice women for dinner. I'd explained that I was still married and that it wasn't right. When Felice asked about the divorce, I explained that there was no proof of adultery, and at this point didn't really care enough to pursue it. I hoped, that Daisy would file for divorce eventually. Meanwhile, I didn't want her to know where I was. Felice shook her head. "You aren't in Maryland anymore. You're in California. Reagan signed the Family Law Act in 1969. You can get a divorce here on irreconcilable differences, which can be anything, and no proof needed." Using my Army contacts in Maryland, I was able to track down Sophie, who was still living with her domineering sergeant. From that, I was able to easily find Daisy, who was living with a different sergeant. I served her with divorce papers there. Daisy cried when she got the divorce papers. She had hoped that one day I would realize I loved her and come back and rescue her. She had wanted to fight the divorce, but her master Marty stopped that. "You're mine, you bitch. Let the bastard divorce you." The thrill of being dominated and treated like a bitch had worn off after I left. She had been pounded into the mattress by a different lover that Strode had gifted her. When she realized he didn't even talk to her, care about her feelings, or even try to make her wet before he had his way with her. She realized she wasn't dominated, she wasn't treated like a slut, she was a slut. One who was now spreading her legs for anyone who cared to. She decided right then that she would change, she would work to get back with me no matter what the cost. How could she have been stupid enough to let me go? She lay in bed and cried for what had happened and what should have happened. She could still feel me, could still feel what the world had been like when I was there. There had to be a way to go back before the stupid and reset, a way to get back to me. But then Marty showed up. She had dated him a few times. He was stronger and more capable than her other lovers. When she tried to explain to him that she was no longer available, he pulled her hair and slapped her hard. She thought it was just a way of expressing himself. It turned out it wasn't. Marty forced her to move in with him. He was now her dominator, her master, as he insisted she call him. She was his, she even had a tattoo on her ass to attest to it. He was clear he didn't love her, he owned her. She was his to use in any way he wanted, his to share in any way he wanted, his to abuse in any way he wanted. She dreamed of me rescuing her until she got the papers. Now she was destroyed. Upon graduating from California State College in San Francisco, my best graduation present was the final divorce decree. I decided that before I settled down, I would backpack through Europe. I understood that a Eurail pass was not expensive, and by staying in hostels I could make Europe pretty affordable. I packed the minimum I needed, said goodbye to my foster family, and flew out of San Francisco International Airport. 2 months later, I was in Amsterdam, almost out of money and ready to return to the United States. Europe had been an adventure, and the hostels had been filled with girls from America and other countries who were also on adventures and willing to be companions. My new single life had truly begun, and I was emotionally ready to start over. I had bought my return ticket, leaving tomorrow. I was out shopping with the last of my money, just enough for last night's stay at the hostel and the bus to the airport the next morning. What was left I had used to buy gifts for Felice and the girls. Windmill toys, Miffy dolls, and cheese were about all I could afford, but I knew the girls would like them. I juggled the bags as I strolled along the canal. Suddenly, I heard a scream. Across the water, a little girl had pushed her toy scooter too close to the edge of the canal and lost her balance, falling over the stone edge into the water. Without thinking, I dropped my bags and pulled off my jacket as I ran across the bridge to get closer to the girl before leaping off the bridge into the water. The bridge was higher and the water shallower than I had anticipated, and I plunged through the water into the mud at the bottom. My feet sank down, and the mud clung to me as I struggled to free myself and reach the girl. Finally, I broke free of the suction and started to surface, leaving one shoe behind in the mud. As I broke the surface, I found myself beside the girl, who was face down in the water. When I turned her over, I saw she had hit her head on the stone wall and was bleeding. I dragged her to a landing where an old man was yelling in panic. Hands reached down and pulled the girl from me. Before I could get out, I saw the scooter slowly sinking and swam to retrieve it. Hands reached out to help me up. A driver was carrying the girl up the stone steps, with the old man hobbling up the stairs behind them. As I looked, they loaded her into a limousine and drove away. I smiled and left the scooter with the people on the steps and went to collect my packages and jacket. They were gone. All my tickets, wallet, money, and passport. I leaned against the bridge railing and wondered how I would get home. The only thing I could think of was to go to the American embassy and see if they could help, but I didn't know was the embassy in Amsterdam or The Hague. Was there a consulate? I decided to head back to the hostel to get my backpack and see if I could shower there. As I hobbled along, I realized that among my other problems, I needed a shoe. How do you buy a shoe when you have no money? Now I wished I'd gotten one of those new credit cards, Bank America or MasterCharge, but I had never felt a need for them before. I hated the idea of being in debt, buying things I didn't pay for. But then I laughed. Even if I had one of those cards, it would have been in my wallet, in my jacket, and stolen with my cash. As I limped and dripped along the sidewalk, I noticed a car pull up beside me. It stopped, and a man in a chauffeur's uniform stepped out. He spoke to me in Dutch, and I shook my head. English or French, I replied. "Excuse me, sir. Are you the gentleman from the canal?" The driver used both languages to reply. I smiled. "How did you find me?" He smiled back. "They told me to look for someone with only one shoe who was soaking wet." "Yeah, that's me." I reluctantly got into the limousine, not because I didn't know who the owner was, but mainly because I was still dripping with dirty, smelly canal water. I really just wanted to get back to the hostel and shower before I got pink eye or some other infection from the polluted water. But Aldert, the driver, insisted. He would drive me back to the hostel to get my backpack, then to my owner's house to shower and have dinner. Since eating dinner had been struck from my budget by the theft of my money, in my stolen jacket, I agreed to the plan. As Aldert pulled into the large driveway, I realized that this was not a house, it was a palace. It was a big, detached mansion, complete with surrounding gardens. I didn't think this kind of luxury existed in Amsterdam. On the steps of the main entrance, there was the old man who had been with the little girl. As I stepped out of the car, the old man approached and hugged me, though I was reluctant. Obviously, the Dutch didn't mind smelly canal water. The man started in Dutch, when Aldert coughed and said, "American." The old man then readily switched to English. "My dear boy, how can I ever thank you? You saved my granddaughter Anneliese. You were so quick, so brave. Such a hero." I was embarrassed at the old man's effusiveness. "I didn't do anything, sir. I was just there, and I jumped in. That's all, sir." Van Ooyen, Griffin Van Ooyen. He introduced himself with a handshake. "I'm Owen Meadows. How is the little one, how you say, Anneliese?" "Yes, Anneliese. She is fine, a bump on her head, but thanks to you nothing else." He took my arm and steered me towards the house. "But let us get you a bath and clean clothes." Later, dressed in my only spare clothes, no shoes, I had no other shoes and figured walking around in my remaining wet shoe would be worse than just wearing socks. I felt very out of place in the stately dining room, wearing my old jeans and white t-shirt, as dinner was served by a pair, what the hell, butlers. I felt like I'd stepped back to the Regency period, although the butlers wore simple black trousers, white shirts, and what I thought were black AICHI jackets. The food was the best I had ever tasted, cooked by Griffin's chef. Griffin was sympathetic about my losses at the canal. "Aldert tells me that you were robbed at the canal. You must let me make good your losses." "Oh, it wasn't much. The biggest loss was my passport and my ticket home tomorrow. I guess I need to go to the embassy tomorrow. Other than that, I lost some cash in my jacket and the gifts I had bought for friends." "No big deal, sir." I paused. "Maybe Aldert could drive me to the embassy tomorrow. Is it here or in The Hague?" "Your embassy is in The Hague, but we have a consulate in Amsterdam. I am sure they can assist you. I will call and make an appointment for you tomorrow morning." Griffin responded with confidence. A woman in a severe brown dress entered the room, taking the hand of the little girl, Anneliese. She smiled as she saw her grandfather and pulled away from the woman to run and jump into his lap. "Grandpa," she yelled. With a broad smile on his face, he hugged her, then settled her on his lap, introduced her to me, and told her the story of the brave man who had jumped into the canal to save her. Again, I was embarrassed by the praise, but the little girl jumped off her grandfather's lap and ran to hug me. Then looking at him, she said in a very adult tone, "Thank you." I smiled and said, "My pleasure, ma'am. You sound American." "I am American. I live in Delaware," she retorted indignantly. Suddenly, there was a slam of the door, and someone called out, "Annalise." The girl's face lit up as she yelled, "Mommy," and ran from the room. There followed the sound of a purse being dropped and then a volley of kisses. Immediately, Annalise returned, taking the hand of a young woman, late 20s or early 30s. Griffin stood up and went to embrace his daughter. As the greetings finished, Griffin led the woman to me, who had also stood to be beside his chair. "And this is Owen Meadows, who we are indebted to for saving our Annalise. Owen, this is my daughter and Annalise's mother, Harmony Borden." Harmony offered her hand and began thanking me profusely, as I again insisted that I hadn't really done much. Finally, they sat back down at the table where Harmony and Annalise served dinner. "Owen needs to go to the consulate tomorrow to get a replacement passport, although I think we must take him to Paquin tomorrow and buy him some new shoes. He lost one in the canal. He can't walk around with only one shoe, can he?" Griffin teased. Harmony laughed. "I'm surprised he was wearing socks at all. Even for an American, that seems overly civilized." I blushed at being teased. "Paquin? Is that a shoe store?" "Yes, they do all of our footwear. They will have a pair for you before we go to the consulate. I have some slippers that you can wear in the meantime," Griffin added. "Owen also lost his plane ticket home. Someone stole his things when he was at the canal. The ticket is no problem. He can fly home with me and Annalise on the company jet." "That's the least we can do for our hero, isn't it, Annalise?" she asked her daughter, who nodded enthusiastically. "Could you put off your return for a week, Owen? Mother would like to spend some time with her father before returning." "I certainly have nothing waiting for me at this point. But I need to be in California, not Delaware. But I'm sure I can find my way home from there," I admitted. Griffin interjected, "I'm sure we can get you home. In the meantime, you will stay with us as our guest." As I started to object, he continued, "And that's the final decision. No arguing." The next day I was fitted for shoes at Paquin, but provided with a pair that fit me to meet my immediate needs. I was surprised by the fit. They were the nicest shoes I had ever owned. As I prepared to leave, the salesman assured me that my remaining shoe would be ready in 3 days. When I objected to Griffin that this was too much, Griffin simply told me, "Nonsense, my boy." I was quite surprised at the consulate to be received by the consul general when Griffin was greeted. I was personally escorted by a consular officer, and my replacement passport was expedited, with a new photograph taken by the consulate photographer. The consul general assured Griffin that the passport would be ready and delivered to his house the next day. On our way home, Griffin stopped at a number of stores, purchasing expensive gifts for Phyllis and the girls to replace the ones that had been stolen. When I realized the price of the gifts, I objected, but Griffin insisted. A necklace for Phyllis and bracelets for the girls. Toys filled the large trunk of the limousine. Even Mark was remembered, with a Patek Philippe watch. I objected again. He thought Phyllis and Mark could buy multiple houses in Oakland with the money spent on these gifts. Nothing, he said, could deter the owner. For the friends of my granddaughter's hero, nothing is too much. I finally persuaded Griffin when I threatened to leave if he didn't stop. Griffin was clearly shocked by my threat. "Please don't do that. Harmony and Annalise would be heartbroken if you left them." His eyebrows shot up, and they'd blame me. I smiled at the old man's distress. "Griffin, please, stop with the hero thing and no rewards. Helping me with my passport, letting me stay at your house, and helping me get home is enough. Please put all those gifts back. They aren't necessary." Griffin agreed, but he didn't understand this American. He had saved the most valuable thing in Griffin's life, Annalise, but refused the credit. While he agreed to return the lavish gifts, he secretly planned to send them to Mark and Felice, using the address from my passport. I learned that Griffin owned Lovo Holdings, a family business but ranked as the 12th largest company in the Netherlands. Harmony was married to an American, Victor Borden, Annalise's father, and ran LVO's operations in America and Delaware. Although she had returned home because of her daughter's concerns, she now had to deal with business matters at the main office while she was in the country. But that gave her plenty of time to spend the rest of the week introducing me to her country, taking me, along with Annalise, around Amsterdam, The Hague, down to the Zeeland beaches, and to Goedam, Edam, and Limburg, until Annalise begged not to see any more cheese being made. Harmony laughed and pointed out that cheese was very important to their dairy-rich country. I found Harmony surprisingly approachable, especially considering she was raised in luxury and held a position of power in the company. I had asked Griffin about her position in the company, and Griffin proudly extolled his daughter's strengths and business acumen. I was impressed. On the last night in the Netherlands, Griffin and Harmony sat down with me, asking about my future plans. I told them honestly that everything was still up in the air. I had just graduated from college, but with 8 years in the service and 4 years of college, I was a 30-year-old with no real engineering experience. I didn't expect employers to be knocking down my door, but I planned on looking for a job when I got back to California. Of course, Griffin and Harmony offered me a job. They owned factories in Delaware where they could use a reliable engineer. I considered it. They were good people, and from what I understood of their business philosophy, that kindness extended to their employees. I was about to accept when Harmony added, the salary would be $150,000 a year, plus benefits. I was stunned. A good salary for an engineer would be less than $70,000. Damn, I thought. Just another hero's bribe. They don't really want me. They just feel they have to reward me. I stood up. I'm tired, and tomorrow will be a long day. I'm going to go to bed. I looked at Griffin and Harmony and shook my head. No. Thanks for the job offer, but no. I think I need to find a job myself. With that, I turned and left. Griffin and Harmony looked at each other in surprise. They had tried to make the job offer as appealing as possible. They never expected I would turn down such an offer. Griffin shook his head. Why did he turn that down? Did we not offer enough? He's a good man. I really hoped he would join us. Harmony sighed. No, Papa, I think we offered too much. Owen is a man who wants to be valued for himself. He doesn't want to be bought, and he feels we are being too lavish with our thanks and appreciation for saving Annalise. She sighed. I like this man. He reminds me of Victor. Griffin was fond of his son-in-law. Just slightly more than comfortable, he still refused any financial help or income from his wife's family. He prided himself on providing for his wife and children with what they needed. To Victor, Harmony's money was hers to do with as she pleased, but it was his job to provide the necessities of life. Both Harmony and Griffin thought he was ridiculous, but Griffin especially grudgingly respected his independent son-in-law. When he had gotten esophageal cancer, Griffin had spent a small fortune trying to get Victor the best possible treatment, but to no avail. He had died 2 years earlier. Griffin, Harmony, and Annalise were still grieving for him. Sophie looked at her daughter with shock. Her sergeant had been transferred to Fort Huachuca in Arizona when the United States Army Intelligence School, USINT, was moved there. Sophie hadn't been back to visit her daughter in over a year. Now she was shocked. What have you done to yourself? Daisy stood there with tears in her eyes. Her neck now had a slave collar tattoo, and shackles now marked both her ankles and left shoulder. Her right breast was branded with Marty's name, and Sophie could see her daughter's unbroad nipple had large rings through it. How could you do this to yourself? Daisy glared at her mother through the tears. Mom, you told me to give myself to a powerful man, that it was the only way I would ever be fulfilled. You made me leave a man who loved me for one who beats me and grooms me. I told you to be dominated, not enslaved, you stupid girl, Sophie retorted, indignant. How dare her daughter blame her for ruining her life? She had been a role model for the girl her whole life, but she couldn't see the difference in their circumstances. Bah, she spat. When I resist Marty, he beats me. I have bruises and scars from being beaten. I have a broken rib from being kicked by him, and he purposely broke my finger twice. I hate him. But I have no money, no place to go, nothing. Daisy pulled at her hair and moaned in frustration. You will come with me. Stroud is being reassigned to Fort Meade to join the Army Intelligence and Security Command. If Marty objects, I will have Stroud report him to the Army and have him kicked out. She called Stroud and told him to come help her move her daughter. I was impressed by the company's Lear jet that brought me Harmony and Annalise back to the United States. The crew of 3 included a pilot, a co-pilot, and a stewardess, and there were 3 separate bedrooms along with the main cabin, which included captain's chairs, a sofa, and a full bar stocked with drinks. It was the most luxurious place I had ever been. We took off after 6 p.m. After tearful goodbyes from Griffin before Alder drove them to the private hangar. We had dinner on the plane and then planned to relax sleeping through the flight. Annalise insisted on sitting on my lap after dinner, in a ploy to delay bedtime as long as possible. After she began to nod off, I carefully lifted her to her designated room and let Molly put her to bed. When Molly returned, she offered me a glass of wine before I went to sleep, and I gladly accepted. I had begun to appreciate Griffin's taste in scotch. As she handed me the glass, she apologized to me. "I'm so sorry about the job offer. It was so clumsy of us, but we really wanted you to join us. You impressed my papa, and believe it or not, that old man is not easily impressed." "I appreciate that. I liked him too. He and his family are all so great." I smiled at Harmony, clearly admiring her. "But you are all so overwhelming, so much more than I could ever handle. I'd be lost in your world." With that, I finished my glass of wine, set it down, and reached for Harmony's hand. Without thinking, I brought my hand to her lips and kissed it. Then, I smiled again and went to my bed. It took Harmony a minute to realize she had been holding her breath, suddenly taking a deep inhale. There was something about me. An hour later, I was awakened by a hand brushing my hair out of my face, and lips lightly touched me. I opened my eyes and saw Harmony gazing at me, clad in a black nightgown. "I couldn't let you leave without saying you'd touched my heart." "What?" I rubbed my face, trying to wake up enough to understand this woman. "Ik hou van you," she whispered as she leaned forward and kissed me again. That woke me up. I was startled, jumping back against the partition. I didn't know what she said, but it sounded too intimate to be innocent, especially in that black nightgown. "You're married. What about your husband?" She knew about my wife. I had told her. How could she think I would do this with another man's wife? "Owen, my husband died 2 years ago. Cancer," she whispered softly. I sat still, absorbing this new information. Yes, while I had told her about Daisy and Sophie, she hadn't mentioned her husband. I watched a tear form in Harmony's eye, then roll down her cheek. I reached out and caught it with my finger. She took my hand and pressed it against her cheek. "But you barely know me." "How could you?" I paused. "What did I say?" "What did you say?" "I love you," Harmony whispered as she moved onto the bed. 2 years later, Annalise kissed her father goodbye as Harmony and I prepared to go to dinner and the theater in Baltimore, with Harmony's business associates. Unlike Victor Borden, I realized that I couldn't support any lifestyle at the level that Harmony and his daughter, as I thought of Annalise, deserved. I had adjusted to the luxury but limited it to what my wife and father-in-law could give me. I had been smitten by those beautiful patent shoes. I didn't know I had ever worn any other shoes, and because of the dinners and meetings I attended with my wife, I had allowed her to buy my wardrobe. Now, the shoes were paired with Seville rose suits, custom shirts from Hong Kong, silk ties from Japan, and casual clothes that cost more than all of the clothes I could remember buying in my life combined. But I figured marriage involved compromise and sacrifice, so I could only smile and bear it. While my wife held the power in the business world, and her family was worth more than the GNP of some countries, I happily worked as an engineer for a factory outside of Wilmington, earning $77,000 a year. I used my salary to take my wife and Annalise on vacations and day trips, although the company jet was used. I was paid, doing a job I liked and understood, had a wife and daughter I loved, and was extremely happy. Mark and Felice thought I was crazy. I had deeded them their house as a late wedding present and sent gifts to their daughters. But I couldn't compete with their foster father. Griffin had taken them to Europe multiple times a year, along with Annalise. The 3 girls were like sisters, and Griffin loved to spoil them all. Mark in particular thought I was crazy. He had no problem wearing his Patek Philippe watch, and Felice loved her necklace, although when she found out the price, she rarely wore it. It spent its time in the safe. As Harmony and I walked out of the Martic restaurant in Baltimore, Harmony felt me suddenly pull her back. When she looked to see what was up, she saw I was staring at 2 women who were walking up the sidewalk. When they saw me, they also abruptly stopped. The younger of the 2 women gasped, "Owen." Harmony could feel I was trying to relax. "Daisy," I said flatly, showing no emotion. Harmony was startled, recognizing the name of my ex-wife. She stared at the woman, looking at the tattoos on her neck and ankles. This was not what she had expected from my description. Daisy was wearing a shapeless dress with long sleeves and a button-down bodice that went up to her neck. She looked tired and distressed, perhaps even more so at seeing her ex-husband, but the lines of distress were not new to her face. "Nice tattoos." Harmony was surprised at my pettiness. I hope you found the pleasure you sought in being dominated. Harmony realized that my own was not petty. I was shocked. Daisy's face fell, she turned away, and ran back in the direction she had been going, crying. Sophie looked at her daughter and then turned to me. Not necessary, you pathetic man. Harmony, knowing the history of this woman, retorted, No, not pathetic, compassionate. Compassionate. Owen is a good man. He and his daughter are the pathetic ones. She stood up and pulled me to her. Not my husband. And he dominates me? He dominates me with tenderness, with love, with care. Go away, you mean bitter woman. As Harmony pulled me, still stunned, into the limousine, Sophie just stared in wonderment before finally turning back to find and care for her daughter. As we pulled away from the curb, Harmony snuggled against me, pulling me close. What do you think? Shall we skip the play? I can send apologies to the Brownmillers tomorrow. I leaned my head against Harmony's and let out a choked sob as I gasped. I loved her. How could she do that to herself? Why? Why, Harmony? I whimpered pathetically. Harmony held me tighter, deeply concerned for her husband. Should you leave? Did you do this to her? Could you save her if you stayed? Harmony pushed me away so she could look into my eyes. No, how could you think that? You didn't do this. She and her mother are the only ones responsible. If you stayed, it would destroy you as well. You did the only thing you could. She could see in my eyes that I still felt guilty. I was happy, but Daisy was destroyed. It didn't make me happy. It hurt to see someone I loved suffer. Harmony's heart overflowed with love for me. What if we help her? Maybe a therapist. Maybe someone who could get those awful tattoos removed. Whatever she needs, we will help her. Okay? What do you think? She pulled me back into her embrace, resting her head on my chest, listening to my breath and heartbeat. Is that what you want to do? Yes, please. I sighed. Can we go home now? I want to hug you and Annalise. I need to remember how beautiful life is. Harmony decided to save the surprise she had planned for me for another night. She couldn't wait too long, or it would be obvious Annalise was about to have a sibling. Daisy finally got her wish. I had come to rescue her, although we never saw each other again. Harmony arranged for a third party to handle everything, and between counseling and tattoo and piercing removal, as well as some plastic surgery to fix scars on her torso and ass, Daisy started to achieve, if not happiness, balance in her life. She never married, never dated again. She went back to work and found a job in DC as a translator, mostly handling legal documents. Her job was very similar to the one she'd had at the embassy in Saigon years before. Outside of work, she volunteered for a charity that worked with abused women. No one seemed surprised when she didn't date or socialize with anyone at work. Everyone felt that a single woman at her age, somewhere between 45 and 50, had long since settled into the life of an old maid. None of them believed she was only in her 30s. The next 10 years went by in a blur of diapers, soccer games, and school plays. Harmony and I had 2 more children, a boy and a girl, and our suburban Delaware home was a constant hub of activity. I was still a good engineer, but I focused more on family. Every week, I carved out time for my wife and kids, whether it was playing baseball, hiking in the woods, or simply reading books by the fireplace. I also devoted time to my own projects, restoring classic cars or tending to the garden. Harmony, with her natural talent for leadership, had taken Volvo Holdings to new heights. Her company had expanded into numerous fields, from renewable energy to biotechnology. She was always busy, but she always made time for the family, always made time for me. Every morning, Harmony woke up earlier than me to prepare breakfast for everyone. She always greeted me with a bright smile as I walked down the stairs, and that smile never faded, even when she was facing challenges in business. I loved Harmony. I loved her intelligence, her strength, and her kindness. I loved the way she always knew how to make me laugh, and the way she always supported me in every decision I made. Our life wasn't always smooth sailing. We had our arguments, our moments of sadness, but we always found a way to overcome them, with patience, understanding, and love for each other. There was a small but present gap in our lives. It was the gap left by Victor Borden, Harmony's deceased husband. I always tried to fill that gap with my love, but I knew that no one could ever replace Victor. Harmony and I always kept a part of our hearts for Victor. We often told our children about Victor, about his life, about his dreams. We also visited Victor's grave frequently, praying together for him. One warm afternoon, Harmony and I were sitting in the garden, with Annalise, our eldest daughter, reading a book. I noticed a green butterfly flitting around a red rose. I smiled and said to Harmony, "That butterfly is beautiful, isn't it?" Harmony followed the butterfly, then turned to me, her eyes sparkling. "It is beautiful. It's like Victor." I was taken aback. I didn't know what she meant. Harmony continued, "Victor loved butterflies. He used to say that butterflies were symbols of freedom, joy, and transformation." I nodded. I remembered Victor. Victor was a man full of passion, always striving for good. He was always happy, always loved life, and always cherished every moment. Harmony looked at me. She could see the sadness in my eyes. She reached out and gently took my hand. "Don't be sad. Victor is always with us. He is in our hearts, in every flower, in every butterfly, in every beautiful moment of this life." I nodded. My heart felt warm. I knew that Harmony was right. Victor would forever be a part of our lives. He would always be with us, in our joys, our sorrows, and our most beautiful moments. I looked at my daughter, Annalise. She was engrossed in her book. I realized that life was short, and the most important thing was to cherish every moment with those we love. I would do my best to give my family a happy life, a life full of laughter, and a life full of meaning. However, on a late afternoon, a letter arrived from Maryland. It was from Sophie, Daisy's mother. The letter was short, but full of dread. "Owen, my daughter Daisy is gone. She was in a car accident. I don't know what to do anymore. My daughter is gone. Come see me, Owen. I need you." When I finished reading the letter, my heart felt like it had broken in two. I looked at Harmony. She was reading a book but had noticed the look of anguish on my face. I'm so sorry," Harmony whispered. "I don't know what to say." I handed the letter to Harmony. Harmony read it, and her tears started to flow. "We need to go, Owen. We need to be with Sophie." I nodded. I wanted to see Sophie too. I wanted to know more about Daisy's death, and I wanted to be there for Sophie at this time. I looked at Annalise. She was looking at her parents with innocent eyes, not understanding what was happening. "My love, Daddy and Mommy need to go on a short trip. Will you stay home with Grandma?" I said to Annalise, trying to keep my voice steady. Annalise nodded. She didn't ask any further questions. Harmony and I kissed our daughter goodbye, then drove to Maryland. The drive to Maryland was long and depressing. I didn't speak, just silently stared out the window. I thought about Daisy, about our happy memories, and about our mistakes. I also thought about Sophie, about the pain she was going through. When we arrived at Sophie's house, I found her sitting in an armchair in the living room, holding a picture of Daisy. Sophie wasn't crying, but her face was full of sorrow. "Mom," I called softly. Sophie looked up at me, her eyes wet with tears. "Owen, my son, you've come," Sophie said, her voice trembling. I went closer to Sophie. I sat down next to her. "Mom, I'm so sorry. I don't know what to say." "It's all right, Owen. You don't need to say anything. You being here is enough." Sophie took my hand, and her tears started to flow again. I hugged Sophie. I comforted her. I knew that no words could ease her pain. I could only be there for her, share her sorrow. Sophie told me about Daisy's death. Daisy had been in a car accident while driving home from work. No one knew exactly what happened, but Daisy's car had veered off the road and hit a utility pole. Daisy died instantly. I listened to Sophie's story, my heart clenched in pain. I thought about Daisy, about her short but turbulent life. I thought about our mistakes, about the words and actions that had driven us apart. After hearing Sophie's story, I asked her, "Mom, what have you done with Daisy's things?" "I cleaned everything up. I left some for your daughters, Annalise and the two little ones. They are Daisy's daughters, and I want them to know that Daisy always loved them. The rest I will keep," Sophie said, her voice heavy with sadness. I nodded. I understood. Sophie had kept Daisy's memories, memories that she would cherish for the rest of her life. I stayed with Sophie for a few days. I helped her with everything. I also took time to remember Daisy, to share our memories with Sophie. I knew that Daisy would always be in our hearts. As I prepared to leave, Sophie gave me a letter that Daisy had written to me before she died. "Daisy wrote this letter to you a year ago, but she never sent it. She wanted you to read it, Owen. I know you will cherish it," Sophie said, her voice hoarse. I took the letter. I thanked Sophie. I looked at the letter. A line of Daisy's handwriting appeared on the paper. "Owen, my love, I love you more than anything." I finished reading the letter, my tears started to flow again. I felt my heart warm, comforted by Daisy's love. I knew that Daisy had forgiven me, and I would always cherish her love. I kissed Sophie goodbye, then set off for home. I knew that life would go on, but Daisy would always be in my heart. I would always remember her, and I would always cherish the love we had. On my way home, I started thinking about what had happened in my life. I had experienced a lot of pain, but I had also found happiness. I had learned many lessons about love, about loss, and about life. I looked out the window, I saw the green fields, the long straight roads, and the pretty houses. I felt my heart fill with hope. I knew that life would go on, and I would continue to live a meaningful life, a life worthy of the love of those I cherished.